Aliens thought humans had abandoned their shipyard, until thousands of warships woke up. The scout ship Velvara Dawn came out of jump space with a soft shudder that rattled the teeth of everyone on board. Commander Tessic Orn gripped the arms of his chair and waited for the stars to stop smearing across the viewport. When they finally settled into pinpricks of light, he let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Report," he said. His navigator, a thin insectoid named Vess, ran her 4 hands over the console. "We are exactly where the old charts placed us, Commander. This is the system the humans called Kepler Junction, or it was, before the war ended." Tessic nodded slowly. He had heard stories about this place his whole life, but he had never expected to see it with his own eyes. 10 years ago, humanity had been the terror of this part of the galaxy. Their warships had burned through 3 alien fleets in a single year, defending territory that no one else dared to touch. Then, without warning, the attacks stopped. Human ships vanished from every border world. Human colonies went quiet. And after a while, other species began to whisper that humanity had lost the will to fight, or worse, that some plague or civil war had wiped them out from the inside. No one truly knew what happened, but everyone agreed on one thing. Humans were gone from Kepler Junction, and they had left something valuable behind. "Bring up the long-range scan again," Tessic said. The main screen flickered, then filled with an image that made even the older crew members lean forward. Kepler Junction was not just an empty system. Floating in high orbit around a rust-colored gas giant was a structure larger than anything Tessic had ever personally witnessed. It stretched for kilometers, a tangle of docking arms, construction cradles, and half-finished hull frames, all connected by a spine of metal that glowed faintly under the light of the system's dim red star. "That is the shipyard," Vess said quietly, "the one from the reports. The one Command has been arguing about for a decade," Tessic muttered. Every major power in this part of space had heard rumors about the Kepler Junction shipyard. Spies, defectors, and long-range scans all agreed that this was where humanity built its most dangerous warships, the ones that had broken 3 alien battle groups without losing a single vessel of their own. If the yard was truly abandoned, then whatever technology remained inside it, whatever half-built hulls sat waiting in those construction cradles, would be worth more than every treasury in the sector combined. That was why the Velvara Dawn had been sent. Not to fight. Not yet. Just to look. No engine signatures, Vess reported. No shield activity. No comm traffic on any frequency, alien or human. The whole structure reads as cold. Dead cold, Commander. Like it has been sitting here for years. Tessic studied the shipyard on the screen. Something about its scale unsettled him, even from this distance. It was too big, too quiet. A structure meant to build warships for an empire, sitting silent in the dark like a grave marker. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said. "Humans were clever. If they left traps behind, I want to know before we walk into one." He ordered a full passive scan. No active pings, no probes, nothing that might announce their presence. For 6 hours, the Velvara Dawn drifted at the edge of the system, gathering every scrap of data its sensors could pull in. The results came back the same each time. No power signatures beyond a faint background hum that the science officer said was probably just residual heat from old reactors, slowly cooling over the years. No weapons charging, no shields, no drone patrols. The shipyard sat in its orbit like an old, rusted skeleton, exactly what a person would expect to find if the empire that built it had collapsed and simply stopped paying attention. "It matches the intelligence reports," said Ren Kalu, the ship's political officer, a stocky man from the Coalition homeworld, who had joined this mission specifically to decide what to tell the Council. 6 months ago, a merchant convoy passed through the outer edge of this system and reported the same thing. No response to hails. No activity. They assumed the yard had been decommissioned. "Assumed," Tessic repeated. "We are not paid to assume." Still, the data was hard to argue with. Humanity's war fleet had not been seen anywhere in known space for almost a full standard year. Their border colonies had gone dark one by one, some evacuated, some simply left running on automated systems with no one answering the call. The strongest theory floating around the Coalition's intelligence circles was that some kind of internal collapse had struck the human species. A plague, a rebellion, a resource crisis, something that had forced them to pull back every ship and every soldier to defend their own worlds. abandoning everything else, including this shipyard. If that was true, then Kepler Junction was simply sitting here, waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. Send the report back to Coalition Command, Tessic said finally. Tell them what we found. Recommend a full survey team, with military escort, to investigate the shipyard directly. I want engineers who can tell us what state those unfinished hulls are in, and I want enough firepower nearby, in case I am wrong about this being empty. Wren frowned. Command wants an answer within the day, Commander. If we wait for a full escort fleet to arrive, other governments may hear the same rumors we did. There have already been 3 deep scan sweeps by unknown ships in this sector over the last month. Someone else is looking too. Tessic knew that already. It was the reason the Coalition had rushed the Velvara Dawn out here in the first place, ahead of a proper survey mission, just to get eyes on the target before some rival power claimed it first. Space was full of scavengers these days, and a prize like this would draw every one of them. Fine, he said. We send a small survey team in first, just enough to confirm the yard is truly dead, and to get a look at what is inside those construction cradles. If anything looks wrong, we pull back immediately, and wait for reinforcements. It took another hour to prepare the shuttle. Tessic chose 6 crew members for the survey team, 2 engineers, 2 soldiers for security, a doctor in case anyone was injured by unstable wreckage, and Vess, whose scanning skills were the sharpest on the ship. He considered going himself but decided against it. A commander's place was on the bridge, watching the whole picture, not crawling through the guts of a dead shipyard. As the shuttle detached and began its slow drift toward the massive structure, Tessic watched the feed from its forward camera. The shipyard grew larger and larger on the screen, until it swallowed the entire frame. Up close, it looked even more impressive than the scans had suggested. Massive support beams as thick as buildings stretched between docking arms. Rows of construction cradles ran along the spine of the structure, some empty, some holding half-finished hulls that gleamed a strange, unfamiliar gray under the shuttle's floodlights. I count at least 40 cradles just on this side, one of the engineers reported over the comm. Some of these hulls look almost complete, Commander. If we could tow even a few of these back to a Coalition shipyard for study, we could learn things about human hull design that we have never had access to before. Just get inside and confirm the place is empty first, Tessic said. Then we can start dreaming about salvage rights. The shuttle found a docking port near the base of the structure, an old cargo bay, large enough to swallow a dozen ships like theirs. The bay doors were closed, but unpowered, and the engineers had to force them open manually, using cutting tools to pry apart the seals. Inside, the survey team found exactly what Tessic expected: darkness, cold metal, and silence. No atmosphere, Vess reported, as she stepped through the airlock in her suit. No gravity. No power in this section at all. It really does look abandoned, Commander. The team moved deeper into the shipyard, their suit lights cutting narrow beams through the dark. They passed empty maintenance bays, silent control rooms with dead monitors, and long corridors lined with storage racks that still held tools, spare parts, and equipment, as if the workers had simply put everything down one day and never come back. There were no bodies, no signs of violence, no sign of any evacuation in a hurry. It looked less like a place that had been abandoned in a panic, and more like a place that had simply been shut down, carefully, deliberately, and left to sleep. This is strange, Vess said, running her scanner over a control panel. Everything here is powered down, but it is not damaged. Every system looks intact. It is like someone flipped a switch and just walked away. Maybe they meant to come back, one of the soldiers suggested. Maybe they never got the chance, Wren's voice added over the comm from the shuttle. If humanity truly did collapse, whoever was supposed to keep this place running might not even exist anymore. Tessic listened to the reports from his chair on the bridge, watching the shipyard grow smaller and smaller as the true scale of it became clear through the survey team's cameras. 40 cradles on one side. The scans suggested at least 200 more scattered throughout the rest of the structure. If even half of those held finished or nearly finished warships, this discovery would change the balance of power in the entire sector. Commander, Vess said suddenly, her voice tighter than before. We found something you need to see. The feed from her helmet camera flickered to life on the main screen. She was standing in a massive open chamber, larger than anything they had passed through before. Its far wall, lost in darkness, beyond the reach of her suit light. As she swept the light slowly across the space, Tessic felt his chest tighten. Ships, hundreds of them, docked in neat rows that stretched farther than the light could reach, their hulls dark and silent, their weapons ports closed, their engines cold. They were not half-built hulls in construction cradles. They were finished warships, fully assembled, fully armed as far as the scanners could tell, sitting in perfect formation, like soldiers standing at attention, waiting for an order that never came. "That's not a shipyard," one of the soldiers whispered. "That's a fleet." Tessic stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications. If this was only one chamber, and the structure held hundreds more like it, then the Coalition was not looking at a simple salvage opportunity. They were looking at the ghost of humanity's entire war machine, sitting silent and untouched, waiting in the dark. "Get a full count," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Every ship, every cradle, every chamber. I want numbers, before we tell command anything else." It took the survey team another 2 hours to map out even a fraction of the structure. What they found only deepened the mystery. Chamber after chamber held rows of warships, all in the same dormant state, all perfectly preserved, all completely silent. Some chambers held smaller vessels, sleek attack craft built for speed. Others held massive capital ships, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements that dwarfed anything the Coalition currently fielded. By the time the survey team returned to the shuttle, their preliminary count had already passed 3,000 ships, and they had not even reached the far end of the structure. 3,000, Wren said slowly, once the shuttle had docked back with the Velvara Dawn, and the team was debriefing on the bridge. "Commander, if this report is accurate, this is the largest warship reserve any species has ever discovered. This could be worth more than entire star systems." Tessic should have felt excited. Instead, a cold unease settled in his stomach, the same feeling he used to get as a young soldier standing guard on a quiet border world, certain that something was wrong, even when every sensor said otherwise. "It doesn't make sense," he said. "Humans do not leave weapons unguarded, not weapons like this. If they truly collapsed, why leave this place intact? Why not destroy it, or at least strip it bare, rather than let it fall into someone else's hands?" "Maybe they had no choice," Vess offered. "Maybe whatever happened to them happened too fast." "Or maybe," Wren said, a greedy note creeping into his voice, "they simply do not exist anymore, to stop us from taking it." Tessic did not answer right away. He looked at the tactical display, at the massive shape of the shipyard hanging silent against the stars, and he thought about every story he had ever heard about human ingenuity, human stubbornness, human willingness to sacrifice everything rather than lose. It did not feel right. None of it felt right. But the evidence in front of him was clear, and clear evidence was hard to argue against. "Send the full report to Coalition Command," he said finally. "Tell them what we found. Recommend an immediate claim on the shipyard, with a full fleet deployment to secure it before anyone else arrives. And tell them," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "tell them I want a full military escort, not just engineers. If I am wrong about this place being as dead as it looks, I want enough firepower here to deal with the consequences." Wren nodded and moved to send the transmission. Tessic stayed in his chair, staring at the image of the shipyard on the main screen, at the ships sitting silent in the dark, waiting. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself that dead things did not wake up, that silence meant exactly what it appeared to mean, and that the Coalition was about to claim the greatest prize in a generation. But somewhere deep in his chest, that same old unease refused to fade, because he had spent his whole career fighting against an enemy that never did the expected thing, an enemy that turned weakness into strength and silence into a trap. And as he looked at those thousands of dormant warships, he could not shake the feeling that he was not looking at a graveyard. He was looking at something that was only sleeping. 3 days later, the first wave of Coalition claim ships arrived at Kepler Junction, eager to begin stripping the shipyard of its secrets. None of them noticed the single, faint pulse of light that flickered deep within the structure's core the moment their engines entered the system, a quiet signal traveling along cables that had not carried power in what the humans wanted everyone to believe was years. It moved through the dark spine of the station, waking systems one by one, patient and unhurried, like a heart beginning to beat again after a very long sleep. Somewhere inside the shipyard, an old recording began to play, its message meant for no alien ears at all, but for a mind built to listen. Phase 1 complete, the recording said, in a calm human voice. They believe we are gone. Begin Phase 2. And far above, in the dark between the stars, 3,000 ships that were never truly dead began, very quietly, to open their eyes. The claim fleet arrived at Kepler Junction, like a swarm of hungry insects, descending on a carcass. 23 ships in total, most of them cargo haulers and civilian salvage vessels, hastily requisitioned by Coalition Command, escorted by 6 warships under the command of Admiral Uriel Doss, a broad-shouldered man, with a reputation for caution, that had earned him both respect and quiet ridicule among his peers. Tessic Orn watched the fleet arrive from the bridge of the Velvara Dawn, which had remained on station at the edge of the system since his first survey. He had spent the last 3 days going over every scrap of data his team collected, and the unease in his chest had only grown stronger, not weaker. "Admiral Doss is hailing us," Vess said. "Put him through." The screen shifted to show a heavy-set man in a dark uniform, sitting in a command chair that looked too small for him. "Commander Orn, good work finding this place. Command tells me you have some concerns about security." "I do," Tessic said. "The shipyard reads as completely dormant, but the scale of what's inside doesn't match a place that was simply shut down and forgotten. Someone built this to be found eventually, or to wake up eventually. I don't know which. I just know it doesn't sit right with me." Doss's expression didn't change. "Command has run 3 separate analyses on your data. Every one of them agrees the shipyard is a derelict. Residual heat signatures, consistent with reactors that have been powered down for at least 8 months. No defensive systems active. No response to any hail, on any frequency, for 3 straight days. I understand caution, Commander, but we cannot sit here forever, while some other power beats us to the claim. The Zeth Compact already has 2 scout ships sniffing around the outer system." Tessic knew that was true. He had seen the same reports. Rival powers were circling, and every day of delay increased the risk of losing this prize to someone else. Still, something about the whole situation felt wrong, like an itch he could not scratch. "I'm not asking you to abandon the claim, Admiral," Tessic said. "I'm asking you to move carefully. Send in engineering and salvage teams in stages. Keep your warships in defensive formation at all times, ready to respond if anything changes. Don't let greed make everyone reckless." Doss allowed himself a thin smile. "Careful. Yes, I can do careful. But Commander, if what's inside that shipyard is even half of what your report suggests, this find alone could shift the balance of power in this entire sector. My orders are to secure it, and secure it I will." The transmission ended, and Tessic sat back in his chair, watching as the claim fleet began its approach. Salvage crews boarded shuttles bound for different sections of the massive structure. Each team assigned a specific chamber to catalog and begin preparing for extraction. Cargo haulers maneuvered into position near the outer docking arms, ready to begin the slow process of towing away whatever could be moved. It looked, from a distance, like a swarm of scavenger birds picking apart something enormous and still. Inside the shipyard, the salvage teams found more wonders with every hour that passed. Chamber after chamber revealed row upon row of warships, some finished, some still under construction, but all of them intact, all of them far more advanced than anything the Coalition currently possessed. Engineers marveled at hull plating that seemed to shrug off their scanning equipment, weapon systems built around technology no alien science had ever documented, and engine cores that hummed faintly with residual energy, as if they were dreaming rather than dead. "You should see this, Commander," said Lyra Bache, the lead engineer on Doss's team, her voice crackling with excitement over the comm channel that Tessic had insisted on monitoring. "We found what looks like a command chamber. Massive terminal banks. All dark, but the architecture is nothing like standard human ship design. This place wasn't just a shipyard. It was something bigger. A command hub. Maybe the heart of their entire war effort." Tessic listened with growing discomfort. Every new discovery only reinforced his earlier fear. This was not a place that humanity had carelessly left behind. This was a fortress, built with purpose, hidden in a system that most alien powers had written off as strategically worthless. Whoever had constructed it had planned for something, and Tessic could not shake the feeling that whatever they had planned for had not yet happened. On the third day of the salvage operation, something changed. It began small. A junior technician working in one of the outer chambers reported a brief flicker of power in a nearby control panel, gone before anyone could investigate. The report was logged and dismissed as residual static electricity, a common occurrence in old, poorly grounded systems. An hour later, a different team reported the same thing in a chamber on the opposite side of the structure, a faint pulse of light in an old display screen that had been dark since they arrived. "Probably just leftover charge in the capacitors," Lyra said, when Tessic asked about the reports. "This place has been running on backup power reserves for who knows how long. Things like that happen when old systems finally lose the last of their charge." Tessic wanted to believe her. He wanted, more than anything, to believe that the tightness in his chest was simple paranoia, the kind of nervous energy that came from years spent fighting an enemy who never played by expected rules. But paranoia had kept him alive more than once, and he had learned a long time ago not to ignore it just because it was inconvenient. "Keep monitoring for any more anomalies," he told Vess. "I want every flicker, every unexplained reading, logged and reported to me directly." "You think something's wrong," Vess said. It wasn't a question. "I think," Tessic said slowly, "that we are standing inside the belly of something we don't understand, and we are treating it like a corpse when it might just be sleeping." Meanwhile, deep within the structure, in chambers the salvage teams had not yet reached, something was indeed changing. Systems that had lain dormant for nearly a year were slowly coming back to life, one careful step at a time. Not all at once, not in a way that would trigger obvious alarms, but gradually, methodically, the way a body warms up before it moves. The process had been designed that way on purpose. Deep in the structure's core, an artificial intelligence, known only by its designation, Warden, monitored every sensor throughout the shipyard, watching the alien salvage teams pick through chambers and corridors, with a patience that would have unsettled anyone who understood what Warden truly was. Warden had been given a single set of instructions before the humans who built this place had gone silent. Wait, watch, and wake only when the moment was right. Warden had spent the last several days doing exactly that. It watched Admiral Doss's fleet arrive. It watched the salvage teams spread out through the shipyard's chambers, cataloging warships that had been built for a war that was never officially declared over, only paused. It watched Commander Tessic Orn's growing unease with something that, if Warden had been capable of amusement, might have qualified as amusement. The alien commander was closer to the truth than any of his superiors realized, and yet he lacked the authority to act on his instincts. Warden was not yet ready to reveal itself. The plan required patience. Every ship in this shipyard needed to be positioned, every system needed to be checked, and most importantly, enough of the alien fleet needed to commit itself fully to the salvage operation before the trap could close with maximum effect. Waking too early would mean losing the element of surprise. Waking too late would mean losing the shipyard itself to alien hands. So Warden waited and watched, and quietly continued its preparations, chamber by chamber, system by system, letting the aliens believe they had stumbled onto an abandoned treasure, while the true purpose of Kepler Junction slowly stirred beneath their feet. On the fourth day, Admiral Doss ordered the first ship extraction to begin. A finished warship, designated by the Coalition survey team as Hull 7, was selected for towing back to Coalition space for study. Engineers spent hours rigging tow cables to the massive vessel's hull, careful not to damage anything that might be valuable for research. The operation drew crowds of onlookers from across the fleet, everyone eager to witness the moment humanity's most feared warship class was finally hauled away as spoils of war. Tessic watched the extraction from the Velvara Dawn's bridge, his stomach in knots the entire time. As the tow ships began pulling Hull 7 free from its cradle, he found himself holding his breath, half expecting something terrible to happen. Nothing did. The warship drifted free, silent and dark, exactly as expected, and a ragged cheer went up across the comm channels shared between the claim fleet's crews. "See, Commander?" Doss's voice came through, smug and satisfied. "Nothing to worry about. Just a very large, very valuable piece of scrap metal." Tessic did not answer right away. He watched Hull 7 drift slowly away from the shipyard, its dark hull reflecting the dim red light of the system's star, and he told himself that maybe, just maybe, He had been wrong. Maybe this really was nothing more than a graveyard, and the itch in his chest was nothing more than old habits from a war that had already ended. But that night, as the claim fleet settled into a rotation of rest shifts and continued salvage operations, Vess brought him something that made his blood run cold. "Commander, I've been cross-referencing every anomaly report we've logged over the past 4 days," she said, pulling up a display on the main screen. "Individually, none of them mean much. Flickers of power, brief energy spikes, strange readings that clear up before anyone can investigate. But when you map them by location and time, there's a pattern." The display showed a schematic of the shipyard, dozens of tiny red markers scattered across its structure, each one representing an anomaly report. As Vess adjusted the timeline, the markers began to shift, and Tessic felt his stomach drop as he watched the pattern emerge. "They're not random," he said quietly. "No," Vess agreed. "They're moving. Slowly, chamber by chamber, in a specific direction, like something is spreading through the structure, waking it up, piece by piece." Tessic stared at the screen, at the slow, deliberate crawl of anomalies working their way through the shipyard systems, and he understood, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had been right from the very beginning. This was not a graveyard. This was never a graveyard. It was a trap, and the Coalition's entire claim fleet had just walked directly into its jaws. "Get me Admiral Doss," he said. "Now." It took several minutes for the transmission to connect, and when Doss's face finally appeared on the screen, he looked irritated at being woken during his rest cycle. "Commander, this had better be important." "Admiral, I need you to pull your salvage teams back immediately," Tessic said. "All of them, right now." Doss's irritation shifted into something closer to anger. "Do you have any idea what that would cost us? We have crews spread across a dozen chambers, mid-catalog on some of the most valuable finds of the century, and you want me to pull everyone back because of what? A hunch?" "Not a hunch. Data." Tessic forwarded Vess's analysis to Doss's console. "Look at the pattern. Something is waking up inside that shipyard, and it has been for days. We don't know what it is, or what it's capable of, but I am telling you, as clearly as I can, that we need to get our people out of there, before we find out the hard way." Doss studied the display for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. This could be nothing more than residual power cycling through old systems, as they finally lose the last of their charge, exactly like your engineer suggested days ago. "I am not going to abandon a discovery this significant, based on a pattern that could have a dozen harmless explanations." "Admiral, I hear your concerns, Commander," Doss cut him off. "I will increase security protocols and order all teams to report any anomaly immediately, no matter how small. But we are not pulling back, not yet. This shipyard is too important, and I will not be the man who lost it because we got spooked by some flickering lights." The transmission ended before Tessic could argue further. He sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the dark shape of the shipyard on the main screen, at the thousands of ships still sitting silently in their chambers, and at the slow, patient crawl of anomalies still spreading through its systems. "He's not going to listen," Vess said quietly. "No," Tessic agreed. "He's not." "So what do we do?" Tessic thought about it for a long time before answering. He thought about every story he had ever heard about human stubbornness, about a species that had fought 3 separate wars against overwhelming odds, and won every single one of them through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. He thought about the recording Warden had triggered days earlier, the one his own sensors had barely caught before it vanished into the shipyard systems, a calm human voice saying, "Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. "We prepare," he said finally. Quietly, without drawing attention, we ready the Velvara Dawn to move on a moment's notice. We keep our people close, our shields charged, and our engines warm, and we watch that pattern crawl through the shipyard systems, chamber by chamber, until it finally reaches wherever it's going. And then? Tessic looked at the screen, at the dark shape of Kepler Junction's shipyard hanging silent against the stars, and for the first time in days, he felt something other than unease. He felt something closer to certainty. "Then we find out exactly what humanity left waiting in the dark," he said. "And we pray we're ready for it." Outside, unseen by any sensor still operating, The slow crawl of light continued its patient journey through the shipyard's ancient systems, moving ever closer to the deepest chambers, where 3,000 warships waited, silent and still, for the moment their long sleep would finally come to an end. 5 more days passed, and the slow crawl of anomalies continued its patient path through the shipyard systems. Tessic tracked it obsessively, cross-referencing every flicker of power, every strange sensor reading, every brief pulse of light that Vess's analysis picked up. The pattern never wavered from its course. Chamber by chamber, section by section, something was waking the shipyard from the inside out, and it showed no sign of stopping. Admiral Doss, for his part, remained convinced that nothing was truly wrong. The salvage operation had expanded significantly since the first successful extraction of Hull 7. Coalition Command, thrilled by the initial reports, had authorized additional resources, more cargo haulers, more engineering teams, more warships, to help secure what everyone now believed was the single greatest military discovery in a generation. The claim fleet at Kepler Junction had grown from 29 ships to over 60, with more arriving every day. Tessic watched the buildup with growing dread. Every new ship that arrived was another target, another life that would be at risk, when whatever was sleeping inside that shipyard finally woke up completely. He had tried 3 more times to convince Doss to slow down, to pull back, to at least prepare proper contingency plans in case things went wrong. Each time, he was politely but firmly dismissed. "You worry too much, Commander," Doss told him during their last conversation, 4 days into the expanded operation. "We've extracted 6 more warships without incident. My engineers tell me the anomalies you keep tracking have actually decreased in frequency over the past 2 days. Whatever residual power was cycling through those old systems, it's finally settling down. In another week, we'll have this place fully cataloged and half of it ready for transport back to Coalition space." Tessic did not believe him, but he had no authority to override the Admiral's decisions. All he could do was keep the Velvara Dawn ready, keep his own crew alert, and hope that whatever was coming would give him enough warning to act. The warning, when it finally came, was far shorter than he had hoped. It happened on the 9th day of the salvage operation, during what should have been a routine extraction of Hull 12, one of the larger capital-class warships discovered deep within the shipyard's central spine. A team of engineers, led by Lyra Bache, had spent the morning rigging tow cables to the massive vessel, working carefully to avoid damaging any of its systems. Everything had proceeded normally, exactly as it had for the previous 11 extractions. Then, without warning, every light in the chamber came on at once. "What's happening?" Lyra's voice crackled over the comm, sharp with sudden alarm. "Commander, the whole chamber just lit up. Power readings are spiking across the board. I've never seen anything like this." Tessic was already moving, pulling up every sensor feed available from that section of the shipyard. On the main screen, he watched as system after system flickered to life, not just in the chamber where Lyra's team was working, but throughout the entire surrounding section. Corridors that had been dark for days suddenly blazed with light. Control panels that had shown no activity in over a week suddenly displayed active readouts. "Get your team out of there," Tessic said, his voice tight. "Right now, Lyra. Do not wait for orders from Doss. Get out." "Commander, now." To her credit, Lyra did not argue further. Over the comm, Tessic could hear the sounds of her team scrambling, the clatter of equipment being abandoned, the heavy breathing of people moving fast in bulky suits. He watched their tracking beacons on the screen as they raced back toward their shuttle, moving through corridors that continued to light up around them section by section, as if something enormous was slowly opening its eyes. "Admiral Doss," Tessic said, opening a channel to the flagship. "Whatever is happening, it's accelerating. I need every team pulled out of that shipyard immediately." This time, Doss did not argue. Whatever readings were coming through on his own displays had apparently been enough to shake his confidence. "All teams, emergency evacuation," he ordered over the fleet-wide channel, his voice carrying none of its usual calm authority. "Repeat, all teams evacuate the shipyard immediately. This is not a drill." Across the massive structure, salvage crews scrambled toward their shuttles, abandoning equipment, half-finished catalogs, and rigging cables, in their haste to get clear. Tessic watched the tracking beacons on his display, counting them as they made their way back toward the docking bays where their transport ships waited. Most of the teams made it out in time. A few did not move fast enough. "Commander, we have people trapped in Sector 14, Vess reported, her voice tense. The main corridor connecting their position to the nearest docking bay just sealed itself. Automated blast doors, we think. They're cut off. Can we get another shuttle to them? There's a secondary docking port closer to their position, but it would mean cutting through unexplored sections of the structure. We don't know what's waiting for them there." Tessic felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Somewhere in that massive, awakening structure, a team of people he was responsible for were trapped, with unknown dangers on every side. He thought about ordering a rescue attempt, about sending his own crew into that structure to pull them out. But even as the thought formed, he knew it would likely be a death sentence for anyone who tried. "Lyra," he said, opening a channel to her team's emergency frequency. "Talk to me. What's your situation?" "We're pinned down in what looks like an old maintenance corridor," Lyra's voice came back, strained but steady. "Blast doors sealed both ends. We've got maybe 6 hours of air in our suits. Whatever's waking up out there, it's got us boxed in pretty good. Stay calm. Stay together. We're working on a way to get you out." "Copy that, Commander. For what it's worth, I owe you an apology. Should have listened to your warnings days ago." Tessic didn't have time to respond before the entire shipyard, all at once, came fully alive. It started as a low hum, felt more than heard, vibrating through every ship in the claim fleet still docked near the structure. Then the lights came, blazing through chamber after chamber, corridor after corridor, section after section, until the entire massive shape of the shipyard glowed like a star against the darkness of space. On the main screen, Tessic watched as power readings across the structure spiked to levels that dwarfed anything they had recorded during the initial survey. "Commander," Vess said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The warships, all of them. They're powering up." The image on the screen showed exactly what she described. In chamber after chamber throughout the shipyard, the thousands of dormant warships they had spent the past 9 days cataloging and salvaging began, all at once, to wake up. Engine cores that had sat cold and silent for what everyone believed was nearly a year suddenly flared to life. Weapon systems that had shown no activity throughout the entire survey began charging, their power signatures climbing steadily upward. Shield generators hummed into readiness. Sensor arrays that had been dark and unresponsive suddenly swept outward, scanning the claim fleet that still surrounded the structure. "This is Admiral Doss to all ships," came the frantic transmission across the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, prepare for immediate withdrawal from the system. I repeat, prepare for immediate withdrawal." But it was already too late for a clean retreat. The claim fleet, having grown overconfident during 9 days of uneventful salvage operations, was scattered throughout the system, in a formation better suited for cataloging cargo than defending against an attack. Cargo haulers sat heavily laden with salvaged equipment, their engines cold from days of stationary docking. Warships that should have maintained defensive positions had drifted closer to the shipyard itself, eager to witness each new discovery firsthand. Nearly a third of the fleet's total personnel remained inside the structure itself, still evacuating. Tessic watched the chaos unfold on his screen, with a growing sense of horror. This was exactly the scenario he had feared from the very first day. The moment he had first laid eyes on those thousands of silent warships sitting in perfect formation, waiting for an order that everyone had assumed would never come. "Commander," Vess said, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm picking up something else. A transmission. Broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. It's not encrypted. I think they want us to hear it. Play it." The bridge fell silent as a voice filled the air, calm and measured, carrying none of the panic that had gripped the alien fleet in the past several minutes. It was a human voice, male, speaking in a language that the ship's translation systems processed almost instantly. "Attention, unidentified vessels currently occupying Kepler Junction Shipyard. You are trespassing on active military property belonging to the human systems. You have been observed, cataloged, and your intentions have been noted. This facility was never abandoned. It was waiting." Tessic felt his blood run cold as the voice continued, steady and unhurried, as if its owner had all the time in the world. "You believed humanity had collapsed, that our silence meant weakness, that our absence from the border worlds meant we no longer had the will or the means to defend what belongs to us. You were wrong. Every ship in this shipyard has been fully operational for months, maintained and prepared for exactly this scenario. We allowed you to believe otherwise because we needed to know who among the galaxy's powers would respect what they did not understand, and who would try to take what was never theirs to claim. On the tactical display, the thousands of warships throughout the shipyard began moving, sliding smoothly out of their docking cradles and construction bays, forming up into formations that spoke of extensive drilling and coordination, not the chaotic scramble of a species caught by surprise. You have chosen poorly, the voice concluded. What happens next is the consequence of that choice. The transmission ended, and for a long moment, the bridge of the Velvara Dawn was utterly silent. Tessic stared at the tactical display, at the thousands of warships now moving into attack formation around the very structure his own scouting mission had first identified as a target, and he understood, with total clarity, exactly what kind of trap the coalition had walked into. This had never been about an abandoned shipyard. It had never been about a collapsed civilization too weak to defend its own territory. This had been a test, a deliberate lure, designed to draw out exactly the kind of greed and overconfidence that had brought 60 coalition ships and thousands of personnel directly into the heart of humanity's hidden war fleet. "Orders, Commander?" Vess asked, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Tessic looked at the screen, at the trapped survey team still waiting for rescue in Sector 14, at the chaotic scramble of the coalition claim fleet trying desperately to organize a retreat that should have begun days earlier, and at the calm, deliberate approach of thousands of warships that had been patiently waiting for exactly this moment. "Get me Admiral Doss," he said, "now, before it's too late for any of us." But even as he gave the order, some part of him already knew, with sick certainty, that it already was. The connection to Admiral Doss's flagship took longer than it should have. When his face finally appeared on the screen, Tessic could see the man's composure had cracked completely. Behind him, the bridge of his ship was a storm of shouting officers and flashing alarm lights. "Commander, I don't have time." "Listen to me," Tessic said, cutting him off with a sharpness that made the Admiral pause. "You cannot fight what's coming. You need to order a full withdrawal, right now, every ship that can still move. Leave the salvaged hulls. Leave anything that isn't already loaded. Get your people out of this system." "We have crews still trapped inside that structure." "I know, and if you keep this fleet sitting here trying to save equipment, you're going to lose the people too. Pull back to a defensible distance and figure out extraction from there. If you stay in close formation around that shipyard, you're going to get slaughtered." Doss's jaw tightened, but for the first time in 9 days, he didn't argue. "All ships," he transmitted on the fleet-wide channel. "Full withdrawal, rally point Delta, maximum burn. Warships form a rearguard screen. Get the haulers moving first." It was the right call. It was also, as Tessic had feared, too late. The human fleet did not wait for the coalition ships to organize their retreat. As soon as the last warship cleared its docking cradle, the entire formation surged forward, moving with a speed and precision that no automated system should have been capable of after months of dormancy. Tessic watched in stunned silence as thousands of ships, sorted seamlessly into strike groups, screening elements, and heavy assault formations, began their advance on the scattered coalition fleet. "They're not attacking as one mass," Vess said, her voice tight as she studied the tactical display. "Look at the formation, Commander. That's not a swarm. That's a coordinated fleet action. Someone is commanding this." She was right. As the human warships closed the distance, Tessic could see the shape of a deliberate strategy unfolding. Fast attack craft peeled off from the main formation, racing ahead to cut off the fleeing cargo haulers before they could reach jump range. Heavier capital ships advanced more slowly, forming a wall that pushed the retreating coalition warships into a narrowing corridor of space, funneling them toward waiting weapon batteries. It was not the chaotic assault of an awakened but disorganized force. It was a hunt, executed with the patience and precision of predators who had been planning this moment for a very long time. The first shots came from the fast attack craft, precise energy bolts that tore through the shields of a cargo hauler struggling to build up jump speed. The vessel's shields collapsed under the second volley, and its hull cracked open, spilling atmosphere and debris into the void. Tessic watched the icon representing that ship blink out on his tactical display, and felt his stomach twist. "Commander, orders?" Vess asked. Tessic hesitated only a moment. The Velvara Dawn was a scout ship, lightly armed, built for speed and reconnaissance rather than combat. Engaging the human fleet directly would accomplish nothing except getting his own crew killed. But simply running would mean abandoning the rest of the coalition fleet to whatever fate the humans had planned for them, and it would mean abandoning Lyra's team, still trapped somewhere inside the shipyard. "Move us toward Sector 14, he said. "If there's any chance of pulling our people out before this gets worse, I want to take it. Keep our shields at full power, and stay clear of any direct engagement." "Commander, that's directly into the heart of the battle." "I know. Do it anyway." The Velvara dawn banked hard, cutting through the chaos of the developing battle, as Tessic watched the wider engagement unfold on his secondary displays. Admiral Doss's warships had formed a defensive line, doing their best to screen the fleeing cargo haulers, but they were badly outnumbered and outgunned. Coalition weapon systems, designed to match the capabilities of other known powers in the sector, simply could not compete with the technology humanity had poured into these dormant warships. Shields that should have absorbed multiple hits collapsed after one or two solid strikes. Weapons that should have punched through enemy armor barely scratched the surface of the human hulls. "Their shield technology alone is a full generation ahead of ours," Vess said, studying the readings as they streamed in. "Maybe more. We had no idea." "That's the whole point," Tessic said grimly. "They let us believe they were weak, so we would never learn what they were truly capable of." One by one, the coalition warships fell. A cruiser that had been part of the original claim fleet took a full volley from 3 human attack craft simultaneously, its shields flaring bright before failing entirely, followed seconds later by a series of explosions that tore the vessel apart from bow to stern. Another warship, attempting a desperate ramming maneuver against one of the smaller human vessels, found itself surrounded by a swarm of fighters that stripped away its defenses with methodical efficiency before a single well-placed strike from a capital ship finished the job. Through it all, the human fleet suffered almost no losses. A handful of their smaller craft took damage from lucky coalition strikes, but nothing that slowed the overall advance. It was less a battle than a demonstration, a brutal and efficient reminder of exactly how far the technological gap between the two forces truly ran. Tessic pushed those thoughts aside and focused on his own mission. The Velvara dawn threaded through the chaos, weaving between drifting debris and flashes of weapons fire, angling toward the section of the shipyard where Lyra's team remained trapped. Ahead, he could see the massive docking bay Vess had identified as the closest access point to Sector 14, its doors still sealed from whatever automated lockdown protocol had triggered during the shipyard's awakening. "We're not going to be able to force those doors open from outside," Vess warned. "Not without proper cutting equipment, and we don't have time to rig anything even if we did." "Then we find another way." Tessic opened a channel to Lyra's emergency frequency. "Lyra, this is Orn. We're approaching your position from the outside, but the main doors are sealed. Talk to me about your situation. Any other access points?" There was a long pause before Lyra's voice came back, strained with static. "Commander, there's a maintenance shaft about 30 meters from our position. Looks like it connects to an exterior airlock, but it's small. We might be able to squeeze through in suits, but it would mean cutting through a sealed hatch first. Can you reach it?" "We can try. Give us 10 minutes. 10 minutes. In the middle of an active battle, with dozens of ships dying around them every minute, 10 minutes felt like an impossible luxury. But Tessic had no better option. "Do it. We'll be waiting at the airlock when you get there." He guided the Velvara dawn toward the coordinates Lyra had provided, keeping the ship's shields at maximum and praying that none of the ongoing battle would drift close enough to catch them in its crossfire. Around them, the wider engagement continued to unfold with brutal efficiency. Admiral Doss's flagship, one of the last major coalition warships still fighting, took a devastating hit that stripped away its shields entirely, forcing the vessel into a slow, tumbling retreat, streaming atmosphere from a dozen ruptures along its hull. "Doss's ship is dead in the water," Vess reported. "They're not going to make it out under their own power." Tessic gritted his teeth. There was nothing he could do for the Admiral right now, not while his own crew remained focused on the rescue at Sector 14. He forced himself to keep his attention on the task in front of him, watching the exterior airlock Lyra had described grow larger on his view screen as the Velvara dawn closed the distance. "I have movement at the airlock," Vess said. "It's them, Commander. They made it. Get a tether locked on and pull them aboard, Fast as you can." The next several minutes felt like hours. Tessic watched the docking sequence unfold on his display, the small shapes of 6 suited figures making their way carefully across the gap between the shipyard's exterior and the Velvara Dawn's airlock. Guided by tether lines his crew had fired across the distance. All around them, the battle raged on, weapons fire lighting up the darkness in brilliant flashes, the wreckage of dying ships tumbling silently through space. "All 6 aboard," Vess reported finally, relief evident in her voice. "Airlock cycling now." Tessic allowed himself a brief moment of relief before turning his attention back to the tactical display, and what he saw there erased any comfort almost immediately. The Coalition fleet, once numbering over 60 ships, had been reduced to fewer than 20, most of those badly damaged and struggling to disengage. The human fleet, by contrast, remained almost entirely intact, its formations tightening around the remaining Coalition ships, like a noose slowly closing. "Commander," Vess said quietly, "I think it's time we left too." Tessic nodded, but before he could give the order, a new transmission crackled across every channel simultaneously, the same calm human voice from before, cutting through the chaos of battle communications. "Attention, remaining Coalition vessels. Further resistance is unnecessary. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or continue this engagement and be destroyed. This is your only warning." The remaining Coalition ships, what few were still capable of fighting, began powering down their weapon systems one by one, surrender being the only rational choice against a force that had demonstrated, beyond any doubt, its total dominance. Tessic watched the tactical display with a heavy heart, understanding that he was witnessing not just the destruction of a fleet, but the shattering of every assumption the Coalition and its allies had held about humanity's true strength. "Commander," Vess said, "what about us?" Tessic looked at his own ship's status readouts. The Velvara Dawn had somehow avoided direct engagement throughout the entire battle, its role as a scout and rescue vessel keeping it on the periphery of the fighting. They still had a chance to escape, to carry word of what had happened back to Coalition Command before the human fleet turned its attention their way. "Plot a jump course," he said. "Fastest route back to Coalition space. We need to warn them about what's really waiting out here." As the Velvara Dawn's engines began charging for the jump, Tessic watched the tactical display one final time, taking in the full scope of the devastation. Dozens of Coalition ships destroyed or captured. Thousands of personnel dead, wounded, or now prisoners of a species everyone had believed too weak and broken to defend even its own territory. And at the center of it all, the massive shape of Kepler Junction's shipyard, no longer silent or dark, but blazing with light and power, exactly as it had always been meant to. "Jump ready, Commander." Tessic took one last look at the scene outside his viewport, at the graveyard of Coalition ambitions scattered across the system, and thought about the calm, measured voice that had promised consequences for choosing poorly. "Jump," he said quietly, and the stars outside the Velvara Dawn's viewport smeared into streaks of light as the ship tore itself free from Kepler Junction, carrying with it the terrible truth that humanity had never truly been weak at all. It had simply been waiting. The Velvara Dawn dropped out of jump space, 3 sectors away from Coalition Command's central hub, a heavily fortified system that served as the seat of government for a dozen allied species. Tessic had spent the entire journey compiling every scrap of data his ship had recorded, every sensor reading, every transmission, every image of the human fleet's devastating attack. He knew that when he presented this report, it would not just be seen as a military failure. It would be seen as a warning that changed everything the galaxy thought it understood about humanity. He was not wrong. The Coalition Council convened within hours of his arrival, representatives from every member species crowding into the main chamber to hear his testimony directly. Tessic stood before them, exhausted from the journey, still wearing the same uniform he had worn during the battle, and told them everything. He described the shipyard, the thousands of dormant warships, the slow crawl of anomalies that had warned him something was wrong days before anyone else believed it. He described Admiral Doss's fleet, 60 ships strong, reduced to a handful of survivors in less than an hour of fighting. He described the calm, measured voice that had spoken to them before the attack, and the message it carried, that humanity had never been weak, only waiting. "This cannot be accurate," said Counselor Prath Ven, a representative of the Zeth Compact, his voice sharp with disbelief. Our own intelligence reports confirmed humanity's collapse. Colonies abandoned. Fleets vanished. Are you suggesting all of that was fabricated? I'm suggesting, Tessic said carefully, that humanity allowed us to believe what we wanted to believe. They pulled back from every border world, went silent on every channel, and let their absence speak for itself. We assumed weakness because that was the simplest explanation, and because it served our own ambitions to think a rival power had fallen. We never once considered that a species capable of building 3,000 warships in secret might also be capable of staging their own apparent collapse. The chamber erupted into arguing voices, counselors from a dozen species all trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Tessic waded through the chaos, understanding that no report, however detailed, could fully prepare anyone for the reality of what humanity had accomplished. It took nearly an hour before Council Chair Inez Delar managed to restore some semblance of order. "Commander Orn," she said, once the chamber had quieted enough for her to be heard. "What became of the surviving coalition personnel? The prisoners you mentioned?" "I don't know," Tessic admitted. "We escaped before the final surrender was fully processed. Given how the humans conducted themselves throughout the engagement, precise, controlled, deliberately minimizing unnecessary casualties, despite their overwhelming advantage, I suspect the prisoners are being treated according to whatever standards humanity holds for such situations. But I have no direct evidence to confirm their fate." It was, in fact, only 3 days later that the coalition received its answer, delivered not through diplomatic channels or intelligence reports, but through a direct transmission broadcast on every major frequency used by every species in the sector. The recording showed a woman standing in what appeared to be a command center, her expression calm and businesslike, speaking with the same measured tone Tessic had heard during the battle at Kepler Junction. "This message is intended for every government currently listening," she began. "My name is Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding officer of the Human Defense Forces stationed at Kepler Junction. 9 days ago, a coalition survey team discovered our shipyard and reported it as abandoned. We allowed that belief to persist because we needed to understand which powers in this sector would respect a facility they did not fully comprehend, and which would attempt to exploit what they believed to be humanity's weakness." The recording continued, showing footage of the battle itself from the human fleet's perspective, a stark demonstration of the technological and tactical gap that had been revealed. Admiral Chen's voice remained steady throughout, neither gloating nor apologetic, simply stating facts. "To be clear, this facility was never abandoned. Every warship stationed at Kepler Junction has remained fully operational and battle-ready. Throughout the period the coalition and its allies believed humanity had collapsed. Our apparent withdrawal from border territories was a deliberate strategic decision, not a sign of weakness. We used that time to consolidate our defenses, to prepare our fleets, and to determine which of our neighbors could be trusted, as we consider re-establishing contact with the wider galactic community." The message ended with a final statement that would be repeated, debated, and analyzed by governments across the sector for months to come. "Coalition prisoners captured during the engagement at Kepler Junction are being held under standard treatment protocols and will be returned once appropriate diplomatic arrangements have been made. We do not seek further conflict with any power that respects our territory and our right to defend it. But let this incident serve as a clear reminder. Humanity's silence should never be mistaken for absence, and our patience should never be mistaken for weakness. We are not gone. We were never gone. We were simply waiting to see who we could trust." Tessic watched the recording 3 times before he finally understood the full scope of what had happened. The coalition, and likely every other power in the sector, had spent the better part of a year operating under a false assumption, one that humanity had deliberately cultivated, for reasons that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with strategy. It was, in its own way, one of the most audacious military deceptions Tessic had ever encountered, executed not through lies exactly, but through silence, patience, and the galaxy's own eagerness to believe the worst about a species it had never fully understood. In the weeks that followed, the political fallout was immense. Several governments, including the Zeth Compact, attempted to spin the disaster at Kepler Junction as a coalition failure rather than evidence of humanity's true capabilities. But the footage from Admiral Chen's broadcast made such spin difficult to sustain. Military analysts across a dozen species pored over every frame of the battle recordings, trying to understand exactly how far humanity's technology had advanced during their supposed period of silence. The consensus that emerged was deeply unsettling. Whatever gap had existed between human and alien military capability before the war's official pause had only widened during the months everyone believed humanity was too weak to pose a threat. Tessic found himself promoted, somewhat to his own discomfort, in recognition of his early warnings about the shipyard. Warnings that had ultimately proven correct despite being ignored by his superiors. He used his new position to argue, repeatedly and forcefully, for a change in coalition policy toward humanity, one built on caution and respect rather than the assumption of weakness that had led to the disaster at Kepler Junction. "We spent a year believing they had collapsed because it was convenient for us to believe it," he told the council during one particularly heated session, months after the battle. "We wanted them gone because their strength made us uncomfortable, because a species that could defeat 3 separate fleets without losing a single ship was a species we would rather not think about. So when they went quiet, we told ourselves the story we wanted to hear. That is not their failure, that is ours." Not everyone agreed with his assessment. Some counselors continued to argue that humanity's deception had been an act of bad faith, a deliberate manipulation designed to lure the coalition into a costly and humiliating defeat. Tessic understood their anger, even sympathized with it to some degree, but he could not escape the deeper truth that had settled into his thinking since that day at Kepler Junction. Humanity had not attacked anyone who respected their territory. They had not struck first against any power that left their apparent weakness alone. The trap had only closed on those who tried to claim what was never truly abandoned. 6 months after the battle, the promised prisoner exchange finally took place, conducted with the same careful precision that had characterized every human action Tessic had witnessed. Admiral Doss, who had survived his ship's destruction and spent those months as a human prisoner, returned with a very different perspective than the confident officer who had once dismissed Tessic's warnings. "They treated us fairly," Doss admitted during his own testimony before the council, his voice carrying none of its old certainty. "Better than fairly, honestly. But every conversation I had with their officers, every glimpse I caught of their facilities during my captivity, made one thing clear. We have no real understanding of what humanity has become since this supposed collapse began. What we saw at Kepler Junction may only be a fraction of their true capability." That uncertainty, more than anything else, became the defining legacy of the incident. The coalition, and every other power in the sector, was forced to confront a difficult truth. Humanity was not gone, was not weak, and had spent the better part of a year quietly reshaping the balance of power, while everyone else congratulated themselves on outlasting a fallen rival. No one knew exactly how many more Kepler Junctions existed, hidden in forgotten systems across human space, waiting patiently for the day their silence would finally end. Tessic never forgot the moment he first saw those thousands of dormant warships, sitting in perfect formation, waiting for an order that everyone believed would never come. He carried that image with him through every council session, every policy debate, every argument about how the coalition should approach its dealings with a species that had proven, beyond any doubt, that its patience ran far deeper, and its capabilities extended far further than anyone had dared to imagine. Years later, when he finally retired from active service, he would sometimes tell the story to younger officers, the ones who had grown up hearing about Kepler Junction, only as a historical lesson, rather than something he had witnessed with his own eyes. He always ended the telling the same way, with the same words he had spoken to the council on that very first day. "We assumed their silence meant they were gone," he would say. "We were wrong. They were never gone. They were simply waiting to see who we would choose to be when we thought no one was watching. And in the end, that choice cost us everything." Somewhere out among the stars, humanity continued its quiet work, rebuilding, expanding, and preparing, patient as ever, for whatever the future might bring. And across the wider galaxy, every power that had once dismissed them as broken and weak, now watched the silence of human space with a new and lasting caution, understanding at last the lesson that Kepler Junction had taught them in the harshest way possible. Some sleeping giants are not resting, they are only waiting.